From Shortland Chambers, he is recognised as one of New Zealand's leading media and defamation lawyers. We welcome to the show Robert Stewart. G'day, Robert. Thanks for coming.
No worries. Nice to be here.
Yeah, we're very keen to talk to you as well. This subject comes up every now and again, sort of defamation. We had about it. We talked about it with David Farrier a few months ago, who said he got defamed by a broadcaster, etc., etc., etc. And it's come up again over the weekend with a character by the name of Julian Batchelor, who is touring the country at the moment doing what he describes as an anti-co-governance tour, being accused of being racist by Sanjana Hattotuwa from the Defamation Centre. And he said he's going to sue him unless he apologizes. So I wanted to talk to someone to sort of get, obviously we're not going to necessarily comment on the case.
Sure.
Well, there is no case. It's a threat of a case. I don't know how you handle that as a lawyer. But to kind of learn from you and get from you, what is defamation? And, you know, what is the sort of yardstick for making it stick? So why don't we just ask that question? What is defamation when it comes to a legal context?
Yeah, so look, a defamation is a statement that can be written or oral, which affects the reputation of the person it is directed against, put simply. And so there's no particular set definition of defamation, but, you know, anything, and when I'm giving media law chats to journalists, I say, look, when you're writing a story, turn it round and see if you would like it if it was written about you. And if you think, well, that places me in a sort of an awkward light or makes me sound a bit dodgy, you're probably looking at something that's potentially defamatory, because it's going to affect your reputation. It's going to hold you up for potential ridicule. It's going to indicate to people that you're not a very nice person, or people shouldn't associate with you. You're not good at your job. You can't pay your bills. All those sorts of things are traditionally regarded as defamatory. So yeah, anything that
let me ask you this though, because you said sort of as a measurer, if the subject matter doesn't really like it. I mean, obviously there is lots of things that are written or spoken about subject matters that they may not like, which is completely true as well. Correct. So obviously it's got to be that, I'm assuming it's got to be that they wouldn't really like it, and perhaps you weren't 100% sure of your facts. Is that what you're?
Yeah, that's right. So I mean, the traditional sort of yardstick is people say it's false and defamatory, because although something is defamatory, the media and people publish millions of pieces of defamatory content every day. And the reason for that is there are defenses available where the law allows someone to say something defamatory. And the classic first choice defense is it's true. You know, what I've said about you is true, or the meaning that I'm implying is true, and I can prove it. And the onus is on the defendant or the publisher of the statement to prove that's true. Another defense is, well, it's my opinion. And I think this gets to where you're going with your query about an allegation that someone is a racist. Well, there are and it depends whether it's clearly expressed as opinion or not, because if it's expressed as a statement of fact, a bald sort of statement, so-and-so is a racist, then there will be questions about whether or not that's expressed as someone's opinion or not. Are they expressing opinion or making a statement of fact? That's the first issue. That if it is accepted that it's an expression of opinion, the next line of the inquiry is, well, what are the facts on which that opinion is based? Because the law requires in the publication concerned for those facts to be set out or referred to, or the facts must be so notorious as to make them something that everybody knows. So everyone clearly knows what the opinion is based on.
Right.
And so if someone alleges that someone is a racist, then generally I'd expect, in order for the defense to be viable, I'd expect them to set out what the facts were that they're basing that opinion on. And those facts can be referred to or actually expressly set out.
Let's have a look at that, because I think we have, not that we're commenting on this case necessarily, but I think we have the facts, because there's a short clip from this interview. It's only 30 seconds where Julian Batchelor sets out why Sanjana calls him a racist. So I'll just play this, as I said, 30 seconds, and that'll give people the idea.
He said that I incited hate speech,
violence
against Maori, and that I was a racist. This is racist rhetoric.
Racist rhetoric.
And this is the long cloud of colonialism and so on and so on. So just a whole, sewage pipe of defamation stuff, but really rich defamation material. So we thought, nah, that's enough. We've had enough of this, of people saying things which are untrue, completely untrue.
All right. So again, the things that Julian Batchelor said were the defamatory statements, I'm paraphrasing, is that what Julian has said incited hate speech, incited violence against Māori, that he was racist, that he used racist rhetoric, and that the things he was talking about was the long cloud of colonialism. So he's sort of set out a case as to why he has that opinion. Is that kind of what you're talking about? What's your evidence for your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, he would need, so the person making those statements, and bearing in mind we're hearing from the person who claims they're defamed, but the person who's made the statements, if he says, well, he's said racist rhetoric, he's blamed Maori, you would need to, when making those statements, I would have thought, refer to the statements referring to Maori or the rhetoric and explain or identify those statements, because it's those statements that were made. That the fact that those statements were made and what their content was, that is likely to be the springboard on which the opinion is expressed.
So in a court of law, so to speak, person accused of defaming, the person who is said to do the defaming says, well, I have these opinions because he said this and he's done this and this is in his booklet and he says this. Now, he can be wrong in his assertions, but if he can point to what his evidence is, even if his assertion is wrong, but it's an honest held belief, so the yardstick's quite high, isn't it, for defamation?
Yeah, it's a little bit trickier than that, because you have to establish that those assertions are actually facts, and you have the onus of proving them as facts. So you would have to prove that the statement was made in the booklet. So you produce the booklet.
Right.
You would have to prove that he made these statements in front of an audience, produce a recording of what was said in front of the audience. So those are the facts. The statements were made, they appeared here, here, and here. And on the basis of those statements, I believe this person is expressing racist views. And that's essentially how the defense might be run if you were looking at trying to establish an honest opinion defense.
You used the term reputation before. Does that therefore mean logically, if someone has a terrible reputation, for whatever reason, they've got a terrible past, they're a convicted criminal, whatever, they've got a really bad reputation, it's therefore harder to defame them?
Yes,
those things connect?
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Wow.
The law allows, it's not a defense, but it's phrased as a matter of mitigation. So you can raise as a matter of mitigation the fact that a person has a bad reputation in respect of which the alleged defamation relates. So, if someone had treated someone badly because of their race in the past, for example, then that may be something that you can raise in mitigation of damages. And that's generally how the law compensates people for being defamed, is through the payment of damages or money. And the amount of those damages depends on the severity of the defamation, what the sting of it was, like how bad the defamation was, and also the breadth of publication. So, if you've said it in a national newspaper or on national television, damages, and it is found to be defamatory, no defense applies. Damages are likely to be greater than it's just on a sort of social media post that only 3 or 4 people have seen.
Yeah. A couple of questions. The first one might be impossible to answer, but how many threats of defamation do you think are thrown out there versus are taken to court, like a percentage wise, if you have any idea? But the second thing is, how successful are defamation cases? Like, if they go that far, do they mostly win? Do they mostly lose?
Look, the first question is impossible to answer, but people, that's the first thing people do when they feel that they've been defamed, is to sort of say, you must retract and apologize, or correct and apologize. And if you don't, I will take you to court. And, they're entitled to do that. In terms of going to court. A defamation case is very expensive, as all court cases now are. The issue of access to justice for the public is something that I know the courts and the judiciary are really looking hard at, because it's become a real problem. The courts are really now only able to be used for civil claimants.
Yeah.
It's only really the pretty wealthy who can afford to take a case from the beginning and see it through to the end. That's unfortunate, and it's something that needs to be redressed. But I don't have any clever answers as to how that may happen.
Well, you beautifully kind of led us into the next part of the conversation. I don't know whether that was on purpose or not, Robert, but well done. Lovely segue, as we say in the media. In America, there's a thing called slap suits, where basically my understanding of a slap suit is where basically wealthier people or people with access to money kind of take you to court and keep taking you to court until you just back down because you can't afford it anymore. It's a horrible thought and a horrible process.
Yeah.
And I'd like your commentary on one other part of this conversation that Julian Batchelor had with the interviewer, where it feels to me he said the quiet part out loud.
Yeah.
When people accidentally reveal the dirty secret behind what they're doing. And that's my opinion, an honest held belief, you might say. But I heard this, and for someone like me who doesn't have a massive amount of money behind us, talking publicly, it does concern me. Julian Batchelor absolutely admits that there is a two-tier justice system and that those with the money tend to win the cases. Let me play you a little 30 seconds here.
Yeah, I'd hate to think, though, that the size of someone's bank account would influence the outcome of judicial proceedings in New Zealand, Julian.
Yeah, but you know what, it does, because the guy with the most money that usually wins, because he can go all the way with the courts, and the courts are expensive, hugely expensive. So
yeah, that's all I need to play. He goes on to basically saying, and so he doesn't use these words, but he's implying, so this guy can't afford it, he'll back down. And I'm just like, holy crap, he said that publicly out loud. How does someone like you respond to that kind of comment?
Well, look, I suppose I go back to answering the second part of your earlier question, which was how many cases actually go to court. So of all the threats that are made, very few actually result in proceedings. And then of those that proceedings are issued in relation to, very, very few of those actually get to a substantive hearing before a judge or a judge and a jury. So most of the time, and I would say 99.5% of the time, a case will be resolved before it gets to a hearing. Now, whether that's resolved because one of the parties has run out of money or just gives up, it's difficult to say. But it would be naive to suggest that those who have the most resources behind them are going to give up sooner than someone who doesn't have resources behind them, because I guess, use a really bad analogy like motor racing. I'm going to compete with you against motor racing. I can only afford a Ford Focus non-turbocharged version, and you've got an Aston Martin.
Nice.
It's just it's who's gonna win.
Yeah.
So, but I'd make a big distinction between getting the case to a hearing and winning, because I think it's disingenuous and dangerous to say that the person with the most money will win once it gets to court, because the court will decide.
Well, he said usually wins, and I think what I would assume why he'd say usually is what you've said. We'll just keep going until this person's broke.
So, but once you get to court, the court's going to hear it on its merits. Yep. And in my experience, doesn't matter, once you get to court, doesn't matter how wealthy you are, it's whether the jury or the judge believes you've got a good case. And I've seen cases where someone hasn't got a great case, but the jury loves them, so they want to give them a result that they think is fair. And I've also seen cases where there is a good case, but the jury just doesn't like the claimant, and they give a result which they think's fair to that particular claimant, because they just don't warm to the case that they've brought. So that's where you get that sort of personal side of the defamation, and it's much more personal, particularly if there's a jury, than other civil cases. The jury adds a really interesting dynamic. So yeah.
Hey, one last quick question, and this is just a bit off the cuff because it made me think. Defamation in particular, if you know what you're saying is false and you spread it to tens, hundreds, millions of people, I would assume that that would be quite a strong argument to say I've been defamed. If you're actively spreading information that's false, that you know to be false. And before you jump in, I want to, looking at that man who was interviewing Sean Plunkett, in the last couple of weeks, there's a activist in New Zealand called Chanel Lull, and Twitter went around that he'd stolen a bunch of his own books, claimed insurance on them, and then bought them back to get his numbers up. Sean Plunkett tweeted out the real story of Chanel buying 1,000 copies of his own book. It went to tens of thousands of people. That affected Chanel's life. And then in a Stuff interview, he said, "I'd be honest, I didn't think it was really true, but it was a bit of fun." So he spread a rumor that he knew was not true. Chanel suffered, some personal hardship from it. If Chanel came to you with that kind of thing, is that at least evidence for an investigation of defamation?
Well, I think you've got to look at it on the basis of, you don't look at it as to what someone intended or not, and when they're publishing a defamatory statement, because someone's intention to defame or not is actually irrelevant.
So if the intention is to have a bit of fun, doesn't matter.
No, you'd look at whether the words that were used carried a defamatory meaning, and in that case, it was sort of like insurance fraud, basically. It seems to be. And then, was there a defence? Well, if there's not, then what damages should be awarded. And so, if the judge or the jury thinks damages should be awarded, it's only then when a person's knowledge as to whether what they knew or not was false will be relevant. Because if they knew what they were publishing was a falsehood, then the claimant can seek aggravated damages or even punitive damages, which are damages over and above the damages that would otherwise be awarded. So someone's conduct, and it's not just whether they knew what they were saying was false. It can be the way in which they gossiped about it. It can be the way in which they ran their defence, or ran the defence of the claim. It can be lots of factors that go into assessing whether or not damages should be aggravated.
Yeah, really interesting. From Shortland Chambers, one of New Zealand's leading media and defamation lawyers, that is Robert Stewart. Hey, Robert, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Nice to be here.